Hello everybody, my name is Very Critical Brit and welcome to a critique of Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. This is the first of 3 videos in which I'll be analysing and critiquing the latest Fantastic Beasts film. This first part of the video will be an introduction to myself, my channel and these videos, and while I recommend watching this section to get the context of why I talk about something when I do, it isn't mandatory to watch. Click on the timestamp on screen to skip to the critique. Now, the purpose of these videos is to break down why Crimes of Grindelwald fails, but that isn't just what I'll be talking about. I'm more or less using the film as a bouncing pad to talk about a variety of different films, shows, games, or other pieces of media. These are things that I likely would not get a chance to talk about in their own videos, so I thought there was no better place than to put them in these videos as references and comparisons, and that is something you will see a lot in this critique. I'll be comparing Crimes of Grindelwald to films like Avengers Infinity War, the new Star Wars movies, Pixar movies, and more, because I believe it is a great representation of everything wrong with modern media today. I'm talking about writing, effects, consistency, world-building, etc. With this in mind, I would have to research a lot of Harry Potter lore, so these videos will take a while to come out. I want to make sure most of what I say and most of what I critique is correct, and with a film like Crimes of Grindelwald, which completely ignores world-building in favour of spectacle and doesn't explain anything, this is especially difficult. Patience would be helpful. I am working my hardest on these videos while also balancing an actual life. This isn't my job, I'm just doing this as a hobby, so please excuse any long waiting periods. Regarding the critiques, my big aim is to get all 3 out by the end of the year, but that isn't a guarantee. However, that being said, I will be giving updates on my Twitter, which will be linked in the description below. But like I said before, patience goes a long way in the making of these. I'm hoping for these to be a representation of the best work I can do on YouTube with the resources I have at the moment. So obviously, with that in mind, it is hard to plot when I can release each part. I do have deadlines, and seeing as I have focused on this video a lot and got most of it done within a month, it is possible I might get them all out before autumn. I think it is necessary to say that my job here isn't to prove that your opinion is wrong if you like this film, nor is it to only hate it. People seem to think that objective criticism of art is proving that your feelings are wrong, but that isn't the case. I'm here to look at the film itself, not how you see it. You can like this film while acknowledging criticisms of it. I do that all the time. For instance, I'm a big fan of the Fast and Furious films, however I can acknowledge that they are poorly written and bad pieces of media. Return of the Jedi is my personal favourite Star Wars film, but I accept that it is the weakest film of the original trilogy. If you know me, you will know that I hold the Goblet of Fire film as the worst in the main Harry Potter series, but I still really like it. I could even go to the extent that I like some aspects of this very film, even though I will be criticizing them. The opening is entertaining to me, however it is deeply flawed, and we will talk about that in a moment. This video will not just be me rambling on about how bad the film is for an hour or so. I will be providing legitimate criticism towards the film, some very popular from the beginning and some less popular. I will not pretend like you have to agree with me at all. In fact, I imagine there will be a decent amount of people who disagree with me in some of the things that I say in these videos, and I welcome that. I will happily debate anyone who disagrees with my points, and you never know, maybe I am wrong about some things. But back to the main point, I will not just be talking about the film's bad and weaker elements, because there are good things in this film, believe it or not. A critique is not just criticism, it can be praise as well. In fact, many friends of mine have made or are making critiques that do just that. Focus solely on the film's positive elements to try and come to a conclusion that the film is objectively good, or just spread awareness of what it gets right, and this is what I also want to explore in this series. I will be highlighting good things when we come across them, not just to explain or to let other people know that they are there and why they are good, but also to add variation. Let's just not talk about the bad stuff, because I want to appreciate effort when it is there. If there's ever someone in the unlikely event of talking about these videos and they say that it is just me spreading hate or just being negative, please do kindly let them know that I am attempting to talk about all of the film, whether good or bad. And seeing as we were just talking about objectivity, I want to suggest my friend Marcus's video talking about this subject. He makes some really good points in there, and it pretty much summarizes everything wrong with the art is subjective argument. I also want to suggest the podcast he hosts, Ecom. They aren't just another EFAP knockoff and actually have their own original takes, unlike some other podcasts. I've already guessed it there in which we lost our minds at how bad Us is, so go watch those streams and videos after this one. Now, back to these videos. There are points where I will highlight a smaller issue, you could say a nitpick, and talk about it a lot. I did this quite early on in this video. I'm doing this not because I think these smaller things are huge problems with the film, but because I either want to talk about how it could have been done better, or to talk about other pieces of media. With that all out of the way, let us get on with the critique.
oh, I read Hogwarts: A History, and so I know more about the universe and its history than J.K. Rowling, the person who wrote the books and the Pottermore thing that you read. And then you get hyped because you think you've figured out a way that she's wrong. She can't be wrong, by the way. It's fiction, and there are time turners. You have no idea what's good right now.
We open the film with the American Ministry of Magic, over Makusa, and we see Grindelwald with a guard creature that is later revealed to be called Antonio. We will touch on him a bit later. Madam President is walking with this ministry official, Spielman, and Spielman tells us how long ago the first film's events were, 6 or so months ago, and now Grindelwald has to answer for his crimes in Europe. The Harry Potter franchise has always been good with exposition because the story has been about a young boy joining this new world which he has never seen before nor heard of, not to mention how he is surrounded by people his age, some from visiting families, however their knowledge of magic is fairly limited, so there is a good balance between what his classmates know and what they don't, so they learn things along with Harry. Exposition can come naturally. However, when this and the first Fantastic Beasts film came out, they were presented with a much harder challenge. Explain stuff that is unknown to the viewer while also depicting characters who are already enveloped into this world. And the first film did this by using a Muggle character who has to have the stuff explained to him. Maybe not necessarily in a good way, but that's something for another time if I get around to it. My point is, while the main series handled exposition really well, it seems like that has just been thrown out in these films, in place of just telling information to those who should already know it already. This can be found in a lot of mainstream films, but that isn't to say they all handle it badly. In fact, many of them handle exposition really well. Take The Prestige, for example, a film you should all watch, and if you haven't, spoiler alert. It is Nolan's best film and you should definitely go in without knowing anything about it beforehand. Anyway, in The Prestige, Borden and Andrea compete to outdo each other with magic tricks, resulting in the worst of them coming out. We find out how these magic tricks are done with the characters, so when they find out how the other did the trick, we find out at the same time as well. It is a true masterpiece of filmmaking and, as we are now talking about, giving exposition. It knows the balance, it knows the exact amount of exposition to give and not to give, not bombarding you with the information so that you need to write it all down, but not leaving you feeling empty, like none of it means anything because it is never explained, all up until the climax where it is up to the audience to figure out the ending with what we know already. It is truly a masterpiece in this aspect, something this film fails to do in favour of attempting to explain everything and more. Let's get another example, one that would make more sense as it is in the fantasy genre. How about Lord of the Rings? Again, all three are masterpieces and I hold them up as some of the best films I have ever seen, and you are truly missing out if you haven't seen them. Jay. Now, Lord of the Rings has to plunge the audience into this fantasy world full of complicated creatures and world building. However, we don't know what is going on. How do we get the audience to know what is going on without massive exposition dumps? Well, have the main characters be hobbits, which have been isolated off from the rest of the world because of their culture and the way they live. Lord of the Rings also balances exposition very well, with the audience being able to suss out what is going on, while also taking in the beauty and enormity Middle-earth has to offer. We don't need to be told what Sam's character and personality is, we can see it. I could just show you a small clip of Sam and you already know what he wants, his motivation and his personality.
I don't know why. It makes me sad.
How about this small snippet?
It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy?
These show the audience what Sam's character is really like, however that has been thrown aside for characters telling us what other characters' characters are. How about we talk about one more? The Martian. Once again, I suggest you watch The Martian beforehand because it is a very well done film. Neil deGrasse Tyson has said that The Martian is one of, if not the, most realistic and scientifically accurate science fiction films. So, how do we let the audience know what is happening without being extremely specific? Well, we introduce a means of communication for Mark Watney to NASA on Earth. Therefore, we can have Mark tell NASA what he is doing to survive through updates. This lets us, the audience, be aware of what is actually happening with the characters. This is also a good example of how to convey exposition to people who should already know what is being told to them. All three of these examples are far better than just walking and talking. Is this a big problem with the film? No, not at all. In fact, it barely makes the film worse. However, it is weird to see two Makusa officials having to talk this way when they should not need to. Perhaps we could have a guard trying to talk Madam President and Spielman out of it, but they just say no to him, and that Grindelwald needs to answer for his crimes in Europe. There are far better ways to get this exposition out than walking and talking.
How did you find it? This is obviously the second go for both of you. How did you find it stepping back into those characters again for a second time? Did you do anything kind of different this time around? Or?
I mean, I think that the script asked slightly different things of us, and it was wonderful to discover that when we read the script. Like, you know, she's going to keep challenging us and pushing us in different directions and everything.
Moving on, we now see how Grindelwald is being transported to Europe, and it is via Carriage. This is where the film begins the long decline of acknowledgement of previous world building. In fact, let's touch on that for a second. I won't say that the world building in Harry Potter, or the Wizarding World as it is now called, is perfect. However, that doesn't deny the fact that it is there and there are rules that should be followed. This film partly ignores this in favour of spectacle and action as set pieces, which makes it all the more sad that J.K. Rowling of all people wrote this screenplay. But the fact that it is the Ministry that is using this method of transportation for such a huge criminal shows clear incompetence. How about we think of some defences for this? Perhaps you cannot operate within the Ministry. First of all, that argument is immediately countered in a few minutes with Abernathy, or Grindelwald will say for the sake of simplicity, operating onto the carriage. Or they could have used a portkey, which is still partly risky but would work better than a vulnerable carriage. Or perhaps you could use the Flu network, which would be one of, if not the, safest option of travel, depending on how you use it. There are a variety of different travel options other than a carriage. The biggest problem with the scene outside of the world is the way that it is set up and why it is set up. It is set up in a way that states how powerful and dangerous Grindelwald is. This and the last film have created a world which makes Grindelwald a powerful leader and wizard, which makes the idea of transporting him in this way very flawed for his character in general. Grindelwald is the Voldemort of these films, yet we're supposed to take him seriously if the Ministry transports him like this? It may sound like a stretch of some sort, however just imagine this scene with Thanos instead. Imagine if the Avengers used a very vulnerable way to attack or transport Thanos if they got him into a position to do so. With the context of them doing this, yet there being alternatives that would be much safer, we are supposed to take this as a serious way of dealing with our villain. This would undermine our characters and our world. If our characters are to treat the villain in this manner, then we could assume they don't think very highly of his threat at all, which also goes against the rough idea of the type of ministry America has set up in the first Fantastic Beasts film. I cannot undermine how important it is to have your villain be treated as an actual threat for the sake of your characters and your story. We're, 5 minutes into this film and we're already stuck with this many problems? Now, it is clear why this method of transporting Grindelwald was used. The writers clearly wanted an excuse for Grindelwald to be able to escape, but sacrificed the integrity of characters and world building to do so. We now see that Abernathy has the Elder Wand instead of Spielman, and this raises a question. Why didn't they check the wand box? Would it not be important to check the box that the wand is in to make sure that you do, in fact, have it? This, once again, affects world building, immersion, and characters. This yet again shows that the Ministry is incompetent, and we will continue to see this throughout the film. The Elder Wand is somewhat of a staple in the Harry Potter iconography, so seeing it being handled in such a way takes the audience out of the film. Both Deathly Hallows films establish the Elder Wand to be of great power, something wizards have killed to even touch, something, as told in the tale, gifted by death itself. So this brings up another question: why not transport his wand separately from Grindelwald himself? I once again have to insist that Grindelwald is the most dangerous and powerful wizard of this time period. Transport him with his wand separately, so if he escapes you can easily restrain him and not risk having you and all your forces be overwhelmed and killed. From what we've seen from Grindelwald and what we do see, he is the equivalent to a group of auras. It is necessary that his weapon is separated. If it is mandatory that he is transported in the way that he is, then why not transport the wand and the pact in a different way? It is hard not to compare Grindelwald to Voldemort, however he is written in a way which is hard not to do so. Imagine if the Ministry transported Voldemort with his wand and, let's say, Horcrux, both things he needs. This would destroy the Ministry from an in-world point of view and an out-of-world point of view. And I'm still not done. If being expelled from Hogwarts is enough to warrant your wand being snapped, then why is that not the case for an international terrorist? Well, perhaps they want to see the spell history on his wand, but why would they need to do that? Do they not know almost every crime he is accountable for? And even if they don't, there are hundreds of instances in real life of criminals having their sentences extended due to crimes they have committed only now being led back to them. If they neither want to conduct further investigations, then what have they been doing with it for the last 6 months? Surely if there was still more to find out on it, they would have kept him in their custody until they had done. Continuing on, it is revealed that Abernathy and Grindelwald have swapped, and the method of doing so is particularly unclear. However, I will attempt to break down what happened. First of all, I have to clarify that this is based off of a Wikipedia explanation. It seems like they are the most trustworthy and have a reputation to be right about these things. Now, unbeknownst to the guards and the Makusa president, Grindelwald and Abernathy have managed to use human transfiguration to switch appearances. When the carriage with the false Grindelwald set off, Grindelwald, still disguised as Abernathy, disapparates from the Makusa platform and apparates underneath the carriage, using the Elder Wand. In mid-flight, Abernathy's disguise was revealed inside the carriage of the officials present. The true Grindelwald operated on top of the carriage behind the driver's seat. Grindelwald then gained control of the driver's seat, aware of a fight below him and the oars pursuing behind. Taking control of the reins, Grindelwald drove the carriage down to the Hudson River, with the wheels and thestral hooves grazing the water. One of the oarers crushed his broomstick into a bridge caisson during the chase. Then Grindelwald, using his wand, filled the carriage with water from the river in order to subdue the struggle. This allowed Abernathy to get hold of the vial. Grindelwald then drove the carriage from the river and into the clouds. Still pursued by 3 of the aurors, Grindelwald caused lightning to strike them with his wand, knocking all 3 from the sky. Grindelwald then left the Thestrals to drive themselves as he blasted off the carriage door with his wand, causing the river water to burst out along with the 2 aurors inside. Grindelwald climbed inside, retrieved the silver vial, and restored Abernathy's tongue with a split reptilian one. With that explanation alone, it seems very convoluted and riddled with problems. So let me break one of, if not the biggest one down first. The first problem is the question of, why didn't Grindelwald just leave? He already has the Elder Wand and he keeps it, giving Spielman the empty box. However, Grindelwald also had the Blood Pact at some point. He gave it to Spielman, so when he had it, why wouldn't he just go? A counter to that could be, he has to give the Blood Pact to Spielman so that it isn't revealed that he isn't Abernathy. To that, I would argue it doesn't matter if the Ministry finds out that he isn't Abernathy, because eventually they will just find out that he is Grindelwald anyway, so by then he would just have left. Another counter could be, he needed to go back to get Abernathy. While I partly understand this argument, it still doesn't make sense, which is something I will explain a bit later. Another problem is also a question. Why would Grindelwald use Abernathy? While I understand that it is necessary to swap bodies, it is completely unnecessary to use Abernathy. It is shown in the film that Abernathy must have some form of power within the Ministry, if he is to be trusted to carry Grindelwald's wand and the vial, and also overlook him. So why would he use Abernathy? Surely it would be important to keep Abernathy in the Ministry and not out him as a supporter of you, so you can gather information from the American Ministry, so you know where to and not to go, and what to and what not to do. This is something Voldemort utilized, so you would think that Grindelwald would do the same thing. Having spies, especially spies which are high up in power, are very useful to your plans. It may sound cruel to leave Abernathy, but surely you could just tell him to lie about it. Tell him to say something about how you forced him into that position and made the guards cut out his tongue. If I were to rewrite this scene, I would swap Abernathy with someone else, like this follower, who later questions whether or not he truly follows Grindelwald, which could be started after the escape, which puts him in danger, which makes him wonder if he is even cared about by Grindelwald. I would reveal Abernathy to be part of Grindelwald's forces later in the film, in the 3rd act, as they all enter the circle that Grindelwald creates, because it would make sense for him to be there. The third problem is about how they would have swapped. How would they have gotten the chance to change? Would this mean that the Ministry does not have good security for Grindelwald? How would Abernathy have gotten the chance to meet with Grindelwald without suspicion? These are basic questions which the writers did not bother to ask because they needed Grindelwald to escape no matter what. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it makes sense that Hagrid would constantly be accidentally telling them things about the Philosopher's Stone, because it aligns with his character. It makes sense for him to make these mistakes because his character has been established like that. It seems Rowling wanted to have that same thing happen in Fantastic Beasts, however she did not have a clumsy character at her disposal, so instead she made everyone a clumsy character in order for her scene and her film to work. Now, let me talk about Antonio the guard creature for a couple seconds. This is a small thing, but when did Grindelwald get a chance to tame Antonio? Was Antonio always a pet of Grindelwald's? Or was he tamed by Abernathy? Or was he tamed by Grindelwald or Abernathy while he was guarding Grindelwald? These seem like minute questions, however these change the way the escape works. There cannot be too much context with scenes like these. The Fantastic Beasts Wikipedia gives no answer to any of these questions. Not only would an answer add to the world building, it would also lessen the ridiculousness of Grindelwald's escape. However, I will say this in defense of the film. It would not have worked if Grindelwald just explained the backstory in that moment, so let me invent a hypothetical way this information could be conveyed and still have the dialogue sound natural. Perhaps when Grindelwald is in the arena in the third act, he could compliment Abernathy for taming Antonio and getting him into his cell to guard him with no suspicion. Yes, it does sound clunky, and yes, if this were the case it would also make the Ministry seem incompetent yet again. However, with tweakings it could work. But that is just a hypothetical. It won't be perfect, yet I suggest these things because of what the writers easily could have done to fix these small errors and problems in the script. Also, if Grindelwald came back to the Carriage to save Abernathy out of the kindness of his heart, why would he do that if only to kill Antonio? Cosmonaut Variety Hour made this point, and it is one of the few points he's actually right about in the entirety of his channel. It is very inconsistent to have him do this, only to disregard something very loyal to him. Now, this is also a minute detail, but if the Ministry were to use this mode of transport to move Grindelwald, would they not have a way to bring the festivals back in case Grindelwald were to escape like he does? If they were to use this type of method of transporting him, which is ridiculous, however I have talked about that quite a lot, would they not have a system in place that would prevent Grindelwald from escaping? Where did they get the festivals from? Did Grindelwald give them the festivals so he could escape easily? Why use festivals if you can't train them so if things go awry they can be called back? In fact, did the US Ministry not warn other governments about this as soon as possible? Surely Grindelwald would not make it if the US Ministry actually tried to stop him from getting overseas, right? The consequences of Grindelwald escaping quite literally through the fingers of the Makusa would be devastating for them, but we don't see any of this. Nothing bad politically comes from Grindelwald's escape, and I would say that if other countries chastised the Makusa for transporting Grindelwald in the way that they did, and then made it apparent that it is a ridiculous way for them to do it, and made it very aware that it is a stupid way of doing things, then I would say that it would be much less of a problem, despite it still losing consistency from the first film. It might be obvious at this point that if you were to fix one thing, it would either continue to create or just continue problems. This is how the script is written. This movie is almost impossible to rewrite unless you completely change it, which would also mean you would have to rewrite the first film, however I won't be talking about that for now. Let's say I were to rewrite this opening scene. I would write it so that the Makusa transporting Grindelwald is acknowledged as an unintelligent method, and this could lead to something like a Cold War between European countries and the United States. Do you see the possibilities we have already reached? However, this would once again back up the point of the Makusa being incompetent. The writers have made a script which cannot be rewritten without rewriting the entire film. Take Jurassic Park, the only good one. The cliff problem, which is when the cliff in the T-Rex enclosure appears out of nowhere, is an objective flaw with the film and cannot be dismissed. While this is a problem with the scene, the entirety of the sequence does not need to be rewritten. I encourage a lot of rewrites, however an issue like this doesn't need a full rewrite of the scene. If we change the scene so that the characters don't go to the T-Rex enclosure and instead run to a place which is opposite it, it completes the same goal of the scene. The T-Rex has escaped, Donald Gennaro is dead, and Alan, Dex and Timmy have been split up from the rest of civilization on the island. The cliff is a problem, as I mentioned, and should be written out, and, like I just said, it would accomplish the same goals, but a rewrite isn't mandatory. This isn't the case with Crimes of Grindelwald. I tried to put in some rewrites to put in small changes which would improve the film, quench the problems and accomplish what the scene set out to do. However, by doing these, it creates more problems and furthers my earlier points. I say that an explanation to Antonio could be said in the third act, and Grindelwald could congratulate Abernathy for taming the creature. However, that would make the Ministry seem incompetent if they never noticed Abernathy spending a lot of time with the creature they partly used to guard the most dangerous man in the wizarding and muggle world at the time. It's almost impossible to not make the Makusa seem incompetent if we try to fix the scene with what happens in it. We need to try and think of a completely different scene which accomplishes the same goal. Grindelwald escapes and gets a mode of transportation to get to France. We could have the Ministry transport Grindelwald via Portkey. However, once they get to their destination, it is revealed that Grindelwald is actually Abernathy, and Grindelwald steals his carriage. You could have the Auras try to get him on broomsticks so we could still have an action scene, and because they were not ready to fly yet, they're not prepared and could not manage to get the festivals back. This change accomplishes the same objectives and could add more to Grindelwald's powers and his character. He is willing to sacrifice his followers for his own goals, but disguises this as the greater good. This could bring into question whether or not he is in the right or not, and although he may portray himself as someone who wants to stop another Muggle war, he really wants to find a way to take over the Muggle world. With his followers learning that he will willingly sacrifice them for himself, this could bring them into a grey area, perhaps another faction that fights against Grindelwald and the Ministries. Or perhaps we could show that the followers have been treated poorly by the Ministry, and they only follow Grindelwald because of a sense of obligation, as he seems like the force which will tear down the Macuses and the other Ministry's power, although not realizing how bad he really is. These are introduced by some changes to just the opening scene. This can set the pathway for this in the next films while keeping the world building somewhat and still adding to it. Yes, there are still problems that Grindelwald probably shouldn't have made it to France with the Carriage still, however, the main problems are either lessened or even no more. I will likely not be doing rewrites on this level for the rest of the series, with the exception of the finale, but we have, what, 3+ hours until we get there? Anyway, with that tangent over, let us return to the film. Now we come to the Ministry, and while I won't be praising this film too much, I must acknowledge something that is done well, and this is one such occasion. We see that there are owls being used in the Ministry, which is a nice background touch that might not have been picked up on the first viewing, and actually does something to the world it is adding to. For those of you who are unaware and do not understand what I am talking about, when Harry and Arthur Weasley are going to Harry's hearing in the Ministry, he mentions how they used owls to transport messages to one side of the Ministry to the other, before they started using these paper aeroplane things. Perhaps they have a different name, but for this I'll just call them paper airplanes. It is a nice and subtle way of consistency which I did not pick up on when I first viewed it. However, it does partly feel less subtle when you delve into the problems with the world building just in the first 5 minutes, and it feels more like a look at us, we've added this thing that was mentioned in the other films and books. Although, that being said, I will still give the film praise for such things. So, well done on consistency in world building, which is something I doubt I will say again for the rest of this part and the other two. We are now introduced to Lita Lestrange. Let me talk about her for a second. As Newt and her walk along, they reminisce on what they got up to in Hogwarts. This is yet another example of the poor way of delivering exposition in this film. This is the walk and talk form of exposition where there are two characters walking and giving information about a character or an event. This is commonly regarded as a lazy way of explaining something, but that doesn't mean it can't be done right at all. Although, to give the film credit, it isn't as clunky as other forms of exposition in this film, and it would make sense for two people who haven't seen each other for years and were friends in school to fondly talk about their memories of their school experience. However, it can and can't be executed well, and unfortunately this seems to be somewhere in the middle. There is the odd line or two which is though clunky. For instance,
why do strange creatures love you so much?
This piece of dialogue does not work with the context of their relationship in the next few pieces of dialogue as well. Lita asks this, and Newt gives an answer which Lita talks about like she knows it. This brings up the question of why did she even ask the question if she knew what he was going to say. There are better ways of accomplishing the task of establishing Lita's relationship with Newt than just this piece of clunky dialogue. We are now introduced to Theseus, and before we see him, Newt is talking about him like his relationship isn't the strongest, and he isn't very fond of his brother. Now this is the prime example of how not to write a character who is meant to be annoying, yet lovable. We are meant to see Theseus as an annoying character, yet he has good intentions at heart. However, he isn't written that way. Theseus is talked about by Newt as a bad brother, by constantly nagging him about becoming an Auror. However, the Theseus we see is a kind brother. He constantly wants to help Newt out of the situation he is in. One of these is not like the other. It seems like the writers wanted some sort of Dumbledore and Aberforth type arc between Newt and Theseus. But this isn't the case because of the way they are written. Newt seemingly dislikes his brother for no apparent reason, despite Theseus trying to help him have his travel ban lifted and, as Lita mentions, invite him over for dinner. We are expected to feel that Theseus is a pest, yet still a good and loving brother. However, we don't see that. We only see the good and loving brother and not the pest side of Theseus like he's talked about. I think this is yet another good time for me to talk about another film I recently watched, and I think it would be a good comparison. That is Onward. If you care about spoilers for that film, I suggest you click on the following timestamp. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Onward. While I enjoyed parts of it, it doesn't seem like the well-crafted, well-paced, funny Pixar movies they made in their early years. However, one thing I did like about it and did think was well done was the relationship between the two main characters, Ian and Barley. The film relies on their relationship, so it was executed with the most caution and thought put into it. While Ian doesn't dislike Barley, he does find him annoying at some parts, especially on the adventure when Barley insists on making it like some sort of fantasy adventure like he has played in, let's say, Dungeons and Dragons. However, Ian just wants to do it the fastest way they can, because he just wants to spend time with his dad, which he never met. This all eventually reaches the point where, if they did get their dad back, it would only be for half an hour at most. It all culminates into Ian realising that everything he wanted to do with his dad, he has done with Barley. Now, despite this being somewhat of a
"the real treasure
was the friends we made along the way"
type message, it still works within the film and gives a satisfying conclusion to the characters and the story. It works that there would be this payoff because that is how the characters are written. The writers found the perfect way to balance love and disdain, making the conclusion fit all the better. This seems like what the writers of Fantastic Beasts were trying to accomplish, yet they didn't manage to do so because they made Theseus too good a brother. We don't see the part of Theseus which would give Newt and the audience a reason to dislike him, like Onward does with Barley. To care about these characters and actually be invested in what is next for them means that we have to have actual consistency with them, and we don't have that with Theseus. Now Newt goes to his hearing and we are recapped about what happened in the previous film. The ministry workers tell us about New York being destroyed and that he is banned from travelling internationally. This is a debatable point, but I will say it nonetheless. Why is Newt banned from travelling internationally? It may seem fairly obvious. New York was destroyed and it is partly his fault, but surely the ministry would know that it is actually Credence who destroyed the city. Credence destroying New York was something that wasn't entirely Newt's fault, and not to mention how he also assisted in the capturing of Grindelwald, a man who had, up until this point, killed hundreds of people. Grindelwald is described as a man who plunged the wizarding and muggle worlds into war and chaos, and Newt was a vital part in capturing him, despite him escaping 3 months earlier. In fact, the destruction of New York was Grindelwald's fault, for triggering Credence. The ministry workers tell Newt that they will lift Newt's travel ban as long as he joins the ministry under Theseus' department. Why does the ministry want Newt in Theseus' department? Why wouldn't they want him in the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures where he would actually be helpful? In fact, why does the ministry even want Newt? From what we've seen, he isn't on aura level of wizardry, and we see that in the first film with him barely standing a chance against Grindelwald, so what help do they want from him? If the ministry really wants Newt, why wouldn't they put him into the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures, so that he's still part of the ministry but in a department where he would actually be helpful? It is clear that the ministry wants him for the sake of monitoring Credence and also keeping an eye on him, but can they not do that in a department where he can be of use? Does the ministry not want to also have good workers for their sake? There comes a point when you realise that there is no use in Newt being in this franchise at all anymore, nor his Fantastic Beasts. This is a story he isn't relevant in, yet the writers need him here if they want to show Dumbledore and Grindelwald's famous duel, so this begs the question of why not just make a film about Dumbledore and Grindelwald and not include Newt at all. Newt has no part in this story, and you can see that throughout the film. He will just be standing there in the background as plot points happen because they have nothing to do with him. When the writers attempt to get him involved with the plot and the overarching story, it's with a pathetic idea that should not have gone any further than the first draft. He is included in this film via literal childish gossip with fake news. This isn't how you write characters, nor subplot, nor story. This is the story J.K. Rowling wanted to tell, but we couldn't have found a better way to include him than a piece of fake news which is the equivalent to a TMZ article. This wasn't a result of studio interference, this is what was written by Rowling. Newt did not have to be in this story, yet they wanted him to be anyway. Perhaps we could look at another piece of media which is acclaimed by audiences and critics alike, which features a main character which could be removed from the plot and the events would still occur almost exactly the same. I'm talking now about Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, classed as one of the best films ever made. It isn't much of a secret, but I'll explain it anyway. In Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones isn't necessary for the film's events to play out. The Nazis would open the Ark and die anyway, the Ark would be stored away, and all the other events would unfold, despite what Indy does in the film. This would be a major problem with the film if it did nothing with Indy. But, while the events would happen regardless of his presence, he shapes them so that they happen differently, making him still a useful character. The plot points are shaped and changed because of his inclusion in the film. This is a good example of a character who isn't essential to the plot's events, yet is essential to the film. The same cannot be said for Newt. While he isn't necessary to the story, he isn't written in a way which would make him work in this film. The plot points don't shape around him, he is just there for the plot points to play out regardless. Newt is told again and again and again that he needs to pick a side in the war, but there is no reason for him to do so. Why would either side want Newt? He isn't skilled as a wizard, and while his magical beasts could be useful, that isn't the same as him being on a side. If they need his animals, take them from him. There is no reason for him to pick a side other than to keep him in this collection of films.
He survived, Newt. He's still alive.
Give me a minute to break this down, or 2, or 3, or however long it takes. While we did see a sliver of, I'll say, Credence survive, how is this enough to regain human form, let alone travel to France? How is he in France? How did he survive? How wasn't he spotted by the ministry officials, who were swarming the place after the third act of the first film? The Makusa surely aren't incompetent and useless. Credence died, and that was the end of that. And while, yes, we saw some of him escape, there wasn't enough for him to be back in this form and to get this strong, even within the 9 months from the first film. This is yet another example of the writers not being able to continue the story, so they just decide to continue it and never explain these things. If you watch this and the last film back to back, you will notice how almost everything completed by the end of the first film is utterly destroyed in this one, and nowhere is that more apparent than with Credence. You could re-edit this film so that there are flashbacks every now and then, and the first one would be completely skippable. They wanted to include Credence for these next few films but had written themselves into a corner. They can't bring him back without creating somewhat of a destroyed ending, so they just go with what they could think of first, which was nothing. There's no explanation to how Credence survived the ending of the first Fantastic Beasts. They only say he survived. The same has happened with Star Wars in a way. Palpatine has returned, and the best explanations we get with that shadow revival are
Somehow Palpatine returned.
although that film does have many problems. I have compared this film to the newer Disney Star Wars movies because they're extremely similar. Harry Potter is less focused on telling a good story, and now is more focused on spectacle and lights. In other words, Harry Potter has gone down the J.J. Abrams route. Endless plot holes can be found in both intellectual properties, and it takes hours to unpack and critique them all. Perhaps one day I shall talk about the first Fantastic Beasts film, and I will inevitably talk about the third, fourth and fifth installments. However, it is extremely depressing to see both franchises go down like this. Most of my prepubescent years were spent watching and reading Harry Potter, and now look where we are, and look at where we're coming to. Who knows what will happen after this series ends? Will we get a Quidditch Through the Ages series of films about a huge wizarding war? Perhaps. I don't exactly see that as an impossibility. Forgive me for my tangent, however I can't find a better place to insert it, so here would have to do. Before we return to the film, I'd like to talk about a deleted scene. While most of the deleted scenes taken out of this film aren't very important and mostly just provide nothing new except some fine looking imagery, this scene in question actually gives somewhat of an answer to how Credence is back and in France. It doesn't fully answer how he survived with only this small sliver of himself remaining, but it at least makes it that he isn't just back. Not to mention how the scene is pretty good itself, with Credence going back to his orphanage and weeping over the destruction he caused is actually quite good, but they decided to cut it in favour of the opening escape scene to begin the film. I likely won't be bringing up the deleted scenes like this again, or at least not that much, as there isn't really anything in them which could have improved the plot in film, but we still will talk about them in part 2 or 3, just to discuss everything related to this film. So, Newt declines the ministry position, and we are introduced to talk with Travers, who Newt apparently has a relationship with. We see this type of writing throughout the film, with the majority of new characters having somewhat of a previous relationship with Newt. Newt leaves, meaning he is still banned from travelling internationally, and Travers gets the job of hunting Credence. Theseus confronts Newt after the meeting and tells him that eventually Newt is going to have to pick a side in the war. Once again, there's no reason for Newt to pick a side. Neither side would want him, and even if they do, they would want him for his creatures, not his skill. However, we have already gone over that. Theseus also warns Newt about how the ministry is watching him, which, once again, solidifies how Theseus isn't written the way the writers want him to be. He warns his brother about the ministry watching him. Why would we want to see him as an annoying character? We are now in Paris with Grindelwald, and we see him in the street, and we already have a problem. Grindelwald is famous in the wizarding world. He is wanted everywhere now. He escaped the American ministry and killed a collection of auras in just a film. and that isn't even counting the auras we see him kill at the beginning of the first film. So if he's a famous criminal, why is he just in the middle of the street? Yes, he could take on many auras and win easily, however, is that really something he wants to do? He has escaped from the Makusa and is wanted all over Europe for his crimes, yet he is fine with being in broad daylight in the middle of a busy street. Surely he would be more secretive about his exact whereabouts? Why wouldn't he want to remain hidden and make his followers go out and do these things? Why wouldn't he at least put a hood over his head, because someone who looks like Grindelwald is very easily distinguishable, so at least try and keep yourself hidden. It just shows that you aren't a very competent villain. For comparison's sake, Voldemort was very good at keeping himself secret, but still managed to do things he needed to do, all setting the stage for the Ministry to be infiltrated and taken over by the Death Eaters. Here, Grindelwald doesn't take such precaution, he just walks around as if he isn't the most wanted man in the world in this period of time. Grindelwald's followers break into a house and kill its inhabitants, and this can make a fan of the series feel odd about this scene. It has been established that the killing curse leaves no mark, that is why when the Riddles were killed it was a huge mystery to the Muggle police. How can Grindelwald get away with killing this family if an autopsy shows they did not die of natural causes? Consistency in world building is especially important in the fantasy genre, and to see the writers ignore it and to see such a blatant misuse of it all from the writer of the original series is incredibly astounding to watch, especially from the viewpoint of a long-time fan. Although, where are the bodies going to? A Muggle undertaker presumably, but it is never said. This is never an issue for Grindelwald, he never chastises his followers for using the killing curse. Also, and this isn't just a criticism of this particular scene, but also of the entire film, but what happened to having to save the curse to use it? Avada Kedavra is one of the hardest spells to master, and only the most powerful wizards can use it without speaking, and even Voldemort has to say it on occasion. It is rare in the original series that we would see someone use the curse without saying Avada Kedavra outside of Voldemort, and when we see it being used without the words being said, it makes it all the more powerful. All of these scenes work in the way that they are meant to because of how Avada Kedavra is built up and talked about as one of the hardest spells. Bellatrix says that it is extremely hard to use because you have to truly want to kill the person. You must be filled with so much hatred towards the person that you would be willing to kill them, but we see that the curse is used in these films as a way to quickly kill a character. Are these henchmen as powerful as Lord Voldemort because they use the curse without the words said? This is the same for many spells used in the film, and that is a real issue in a Harry Potter movie, a film set in a universe of wizards and witches. This is for dramatic effect, of course, but there comes a point where dramatic effect overtakes world building and consistency. This film is the prime example of that, and we will see that throughout the runtime. Grindelwald and his followers enter the house, and we get this conversation.
To annihilate non-wizards.
Not all of them, at all.
This is extremely out of place in the film, and takes away from a clever way of showing Grindelwald's motivations. One of his followers asks him a question, and he answers it, which explains his motivation and his goals. Why is he saying this to his followers? Why do his followers feel the need to ask these questions? Do they not know what he wants despite being avid supporters of his and have just killed for him? Why does he have to explain that he doesn't want to kill every Muggle?
We know we go back to Hogwarts, and I don't know about you, but when I saw the film and the John Williams music played and we saw Hogwarts, I felt goosebumps, right? Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. Oh yeah, tingles. You get tingles in your spine.
That music does something to you, doesn't it?
It
takes
does.
you back and to like your 10-year-old version of yourself.
Now we're back in London and we see that Newt is being followed by this man who is presumably some sort of ministry official trying to keep track of Newt and what he's doing. To make sure he isn't followed anymore, he uses some strong magic wind to get rid of him. This is quite an odd decision and I understand why it was included, but not in the way it was. Let's talk about it. It's interesting how we see him following Newt so intently. However, he never shows up again except for when he accommodates some other auras who try to make Dumbledore fight Grindelwald. He just decides not to go to Newt's house and ask him about what was happening before. Also, even if they can't prove Newt is meeting with Dumbledore, they can certainly punish him for using magic in front of Muggles. Guess you can do that now. Also, are we really supposed to believe that the Ministry has to use a person to keep track of people who should not be leaving the country because they destroyed a large portion of New York? You guys really couldn't keep a trace on this one to see where it is and what spells he's doing? But then again, how would Newt get to Paris and how would the plot continue? Also, and Aura really can't think of a better way to deal with the situation? Good to see our Dark Wizard hunting force can't handle literal wind. Oh, except when they can battle a stadium full of Grindelwald supporters. Actually, let's talk about that for a moment. Not the inconsistency with the auras, but with the fact that there is a joke here. In the previous scene, a helpless baby was just murdered, and now we cut to this scene, with slapstick humour with a man being humiliated because the wind is blowing in his direction and it is very strong. It almost feels like a Mr. Bean sketch, doesn't it? With the exception of Mr. Bean being actually funny. Humour can be utilised even in the darkest of circumstances. Jokes can be used to build characters or worlds, sometimes well, other times not so. Although, this scene does do wonders. Well, not the way that the film wants it to, but I do find it quite interesting that this small minute or so of a film can be packed with so many things to say. Who would have known that this small thing breaks the tone and presents much more inconsistency? Newt turns to see a floating glove directing him to the top of a building, and, after a moment's hesitation, he decides to grab its palm and apparate over there. Beforehand, the muggles not noticing anything was a bit of a stretch, however entirely possible. Not noticing children disappearing into a brick wall is possible in a train station where you are rushing to get to your seat or trying to figure out where to go. Not many people are going to look at a family, let alone some teenagers running around with a trolley of suitcases. However, no muggle noticing this floating hand is stretching it a bit too far. None of these people notice this from the corner of their eye, really? Suspension of disbelief is a magical thing, however there is a limit, but we're going to hopefully talk about that in a later part. So I guess not a single person sees this flying hand and sees a random man grab it and disappear. Alright then. And now we are introduced to Dumbledore, and I want to take a moment to praise Jude Law's performance because he does a very good job imitating Michael Gambon while also bringing something new to the table. A lot of the performances in this film are pretty good with what they had to perform with, but it's nice to see actual full-on effort. Dumbledore uses a spell to cast a wave of fog all around London, which he can do, apparently. I'm not denying that he can do that spell, but how can he do it without any repercussions? There aren't any laws against changing the weather to this extent, especially to evade the Ministry. And also, how come the Ministry can't just see if Newt has been talking with Dumbledore? Just check the last spell he cast. If it's the one that causes immense fog, then it's obvious he's been talking with him and you can arrest them. We cut to the street where Dumbledore and Newt are talking and, wait a second, why didn't they just stay on the rooftop? Why go onto the ground to where there are auras who you know are following you to get the slightest bit of evidence that you are confiding with each other? You put the fog down, which would make it harder for them to see you on the roof, but make it easier for them to see you on the ground. Remember when Dumbledore was so smart that he managed to orchestrate a plan which would almost assure Voldemort's downfall, even though it would cost him his life just so that Snape can get into his inner ring and delay him some more? Anyway, what's next?
Even though you did.
This is how we build characters and motivation, ladies and gentlemen, by just saying things that the characters should already know. This is in so many modern films.
Oh, what would Mom and Dad say?
I don't know. They're gone. They died when I was 3, remember?
Clean slate, where you type in someone's name, date of birth. In a few minutes, they're gone from every database on Earth.
Here to there. But it's too far, right? Mm-hmm. So a wormhole bends space like this, so you can take a shortcut through a higher dimension.
Oh, you did this, remember? This happened, remember? Why is Newt saying this to Dumbledore? Dumbledore knows this. This isn't how people speak, even in the wizarding world. I've already gone on a tangent earlier on in this video, but I still find it extremely odd how they decided to make this so clunky and badly written. Oh look, someone running after them. This could have been avoided had you stayed on the roof.
There's a real brother or sister out there that can take his place. He might yet be saved.
Right, so why Newt? Dumbledore explains it's because
you do not seek power or popularity.
But you could have used many other people. Newt isn't the only person who doesn't desire power. Do you realize this? I've already talked about a lot of this, but Newt is only special because of his creatures, not because of his person or skill. You want to include Newt, I understand this, but don't make this about Grindelwald and the war against him. Newt was just some zoologist and an author of a Hogwarts library book, not a key role in the downfall of Grindelwald. Why are you doing this? Rowling seems so into the idea of this chosen one type hero, even though Newt isn't such, that she makes all of her characters ones that have to take down the bad guy. It can't be something like Newt was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or that he got mixed up with some people he shouldn't have, so he has to go to France to get out of the country or something like that. No, Newt has to be the one to move against Grindelwald, even though there are more powerful wizards out there who are as good and better than Newt.
In your shoes, I'd probably refuse to.
Let me touch on this for a second. What is Dumbledore's small plan here? He took the card to Flamel's safety house back, only to give it back to Newt? Okay. Back in Newt's house, we get quite a decent comedic relief moment as we are reintroduced to the Nifflers, which have become quite popular imagery with these films. Not to mention how them being the first beast we see sets up the importance of the Nifflers in the mess of a third act this film has. And hey, while it is a trivial piece of comedy, it is still a series aimed at children, and I'm sure many kids got quite the laugh out of this scene, and many others in this film. I mean, there are quite a lot of comedic scenes in this film. Moving on, we're now in Newt's warehouse zoo place and we're presented with a nice bit of actually good imaginative imagery. Don't worry, parts 2 and 3 will likely not have this much praise in them, there isn't really anything good in the rest of the film. Although, we do get this scene.
Perhaps you should take off your shirt.
Now I won't stay on this for long because there is a lot more to talk about, but what was the point of this? Why did the writers introduce Bunty this way only to have her not show up for the rest of the film and this goes nowhere? While it does show that Newt doesn't just leave his beasts unguarded, why have Bunty be attracted to him? This doesn't progress his character or the story at all and it's just there to... I don't even know actually. It's quite a weird addition which doesn't really add anything at all. Next up, Newt deals with the Kelpie and I don't really have anything to say. The visuals look great, the acting is fine, and there are no errors in the script. It's fine how it is. What's next?
What was that?
Oh dear. This is the part of the film which begins the long descent into endless plot holes and issues, so this might take a while. First of all, Newt tells Bunty to go home, but how's she going to leave? Is there another exit? Why is he telling her to leave when there are intruders around where she can leave? Anyway, we are now reintroduced to Jacob and Queenie, and before we talk about all the issues with that, I just want to talk about Jacob as a character. If I ever do a Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them critique, I'll talk about this in much more detail, but I also want to touch on this a bit now. Like I said earlier on, Jacob was the bridge between the audience and the world. He was what exposition was given to so that the audience can understand what is happening, but that isn't to say he was just the exposition character. And by that I mean the character who is just there to have everything explained to him because he was an actual character and an actual person we could relate to. There's a reason Jacob is cited as the best part of these films, because he is fairly well written and relatable. While all this wizardry is happening, it's nice to have someone grounded in our world. His reactions to the world around him, the way he is acted, his sense of humour and more is what makes him a character who is loved from this franchise. And while his return opens up a multitude of problems, all of which we will talk about in due time, it is nice to see him back again. Anyway, I like Jacob, but I don't like his return. Let's talk about the bad stuff now. This 6-word line completely decimates the scene, the world building, and the ending of the first film. Point is, are you really insisting that everyone who is in New York and was affected by the potion had completely bad memories from the event? I'm sure many people looked to the skies and saw beautiful birds soaring across New York and didn't have a bad memory at all. Not know this? How would none of the ministry know this? Would they really not know about how this potion only wipes bad memories? Are you really telling me that they have never heard of nor tested this to see if it works? We've only covered like half the problems here and the world building has already crumbled. Why have you written it this way? Just make it so that the potion worked but his thoughts for Queenie were so strong that those memories weren't fully wiped out and she just filled in everything for him. That would still create some plot holes, sure, but not on this level. Why do you want to ruin your own films? Also, if that was the case, why did Jacob just walk away? Why didn't he turn back and say it didn't work? Or do his memories not come back until a while after? But it gets worse. Queenie makes them all dinner and we have a point of view shot from Jacob and it is clear he's been put under an enchantment. And I just want to say that we didn't really need this shot. It would have been a much better reveal if we were to work it out ourselves, and when Newt works it out and is about to get rid of the enchantment, that's when we see it from his view. It isn't a big thing, but it feels fairly out of place when Newt, who we are following for the scene, doesn't know, but we do. Continuing on, Queenie is ranting about the law that states that wizards or witches cannot marry muggles, and we learn that Tina became angry with Newt because she read some fake news that said he was getting engaged to Lita Lestrange. One thing I've always liked from the Harry Potter world is the real world parallels. There's fake news. The Ministry utilizes the Daily Prophet to spread untrue messages. Say what you want about the world building, but the way the media is handled in the series is very well done. However, surely something that spreads fake news would be famous for that. Or does Tina just prefer to listen to gossip? I never thought that was the case for her, but alright then. But in the real world, news organizations like CNN are famous for being extremely biased, whether you like them or not. Most people who watch CNN only do so because they are left-wing and want to hear something that appeases them. Something that either criticizes or praises the sitting president. I don't mean to get political here at all, that isn't my aim here, but would this news magazine really not be infamous for it being fake? Perhaps it isn't purposely fake, maybe they grabbed the picture and assumed it was Lita marrying Newt instead of Theseus, but I do find it odd that Tina would just read this and immediately jump to conclusions. It is set up in the first film that she isn't a stupid person. She doesn't just believe what she is told, and she certainly wouldn't jump to this conclusion. Surely there would be some form of uproar about this though. There was really no one who read that magazine and knows it is Theseus who is marrying Lita and accused him of lying. So Tina read this and started dating someone else because nobody decided to make it public that this was fake. Sure. Queenie tells Newt that they are getting married, and this is when Newt realizes that Jacob is under an enchantment.
You've enchanted him, haven't you?
Okay, let's talk about this then. Queenie has essentially taken away Jacob's free will so that they can get married and he cannot say no. This is extremely messed up, and someone wrote it so that Jacob would be chasing Queenie onto the street, not vice versa. Imagine now if the genders were swapped and a man had done this to a woman. There would be outrage and people would see this as a terrible thing the writers did. This is the wizarding world equivalent to drugging someone to do your bidding. The writers wanted to make this seem like a bad thing, yet they have Jacob chase her into the street and have her be upset with him. Jacob has every right to call Queenie crazy. She has very much proven that she is. Also, how long has Jacob been under this spell? A month? 2 months? Did Queenie put him under the spell when she saw him at the end of the first film? Now we get to why Queenie did this, and it's because she...
I just want what everyone else has, that's all.
And I actually like this exchange, out of context. It shows that Jacob does truly love Queenie and doesn't want her to marry him for her sake, not his. So not everything about this scene is bad, but talking about good stuff isn't as fun, so let's flip the board back to the bad stuff. The writers want to change the audience's perspective on this character and this situation. They want us to go from disliking Queenie to feeling sorry for her, but this is jarring. Perhaps you did go through this range of emotions while watching this scene, but I cannot say the same for myself and a fair portion of people. We are supposed to dislike her actions but yet feel sorry for her in a matter of seconds. There are many characters written this way, whether a bad person is doing good things for his friends, and our feelings about him can change in minutes or seconds, depending on how well the story is executed. How about someone who has just done a bad thing or made a mistake and has sacrificed himself to save others to repent for these mistakes? How about a story based around the concept of both characters being bad, but as the story continues, our thoughts about either one changes? In fact, Rowling herself has actually written these characters before. A man who Dumbledore trusted backstabbing him and murdering him, only to have it revealed that he is actually a double agent. Someone who has been working against Voldemort to try and bring an end to him. Only after Snape's final moments do we see how he is a masterfully complex character. There is a reason a lot of people point to The Prince's Tale as one of, if not the, best scene in the series. Everything went into this scene. Music, editing, acting, direction. It is all there to deliver a beautiful conclusion to Snape's character. A character we have, over 8 films, grown to resent and hate as a villain, now being shown as a hero over the course of 5 minutes. We see how, as a child, he was unloved and ignored. As a teenager, he was bullied relentlessly. Finally, as an adult, he was a spy, never able to be himself and constantly living a double life, risking death every moment. The woman he he loves not loving him back and then learning that she was murdered by the man he serves under. This is the reason Snape is considered one of the best characters in Harry Potter. Not the same reason that people like Voldemort, his power, how evil he is and his character, nor is it the same reason that people like Dumbledore, because of his kindness yet dark past. People like Snape because he is an extremely complicated character and unlike anything in this series or modern fantasy. Now, let's compare this to this scene. Jacob chases Queenie out of the house, looking for her to come back and they can all be fine again. Jacob chasing after Queenie shows his love for her, however there isn't any comeuppance to what she did. The whole subplot between these two characters never addresses this and only has it be about Jacob trying to find Queenie. Going back to Snape, the effect of what we see in The Prince's Tale makes us turn from hating him and seeing him as a villain to seeing him as a hero. We don't see such a thing with Queenie. Snape's actions throughout the series warrants this reaction from the audience. Queenie being called crazy because she's been called that her whole life due to her telepathy does not. Snape's memories make him seem like somewhat of a good person. This scene does not. It's meant to give a reason to why we should pity her and accept her actions. With Snape, we understand why he was mean to Harry during his time in Hogwarts. With Queenie, we don't get that. None of this justifies enchanting Jacob and forcing him into marriage. The Prince's Tale works because it doesn't try to place Snape off as a complete hero, or that all of his actions were justified. Snape wasn't a complete hero in the same way Dumbledore is, or how Harry is. His actions while he was teaching at Hogwarts and his unfairness to Harry is never made to seem like a good thing. This does the opposite. We're supposed to forget all of Queenie's actions and then feel sorry for her, and this is the biggest reason The Prince's Tale works and this scene does not. Snape isn't portrayed as a hero through and through. His actions against Dumbledore and Voldemort are. What Queenie did was not good, and this has continued throughout the film, leaving us bewildered as we are supposed to feel emotion in scenes with her, when all we can think of is how terrible her actions and writing is. So this is when the plot comes into motion and we begin the story, with the most beloved character of these films so far left alone in the rain after being drugged to remove his free will. Now we come to one of the few scenes that captures the whimsical essence of the Harry Potter series, although, that being said, it is still flawed. To progress the plot we need the characters in France, but how do we get them there? How do we get Newt and Jacob to know where Queenie is going? Well, Queenie brought a postcard Tina sent her from France coincidentally, and Newt assumes this must mean she is heading to Paris. It is at this point where the issues with Newt's involvement in this overarching plot begin to show. Why exactly do they need to chase after Queenie and make amends this soon? Why is it worth breaking a law which could land you in Azkaban should you be caught? This was obviously meant to be the event which prompted Newt to go to Paris because he was very conflicted about doing what Dumbledore asked him to do. But why couldn't Dumbledore asking him to be what encouraged him? And what are they going to do should they find her? What if she apparates back after they leave? In fact, what is the big rush in finding her anyway? Can't they wait a few days in case she comes back? We are also at a very conflicting place with Queenie and Tina's relationship. She wants to go see her in Paris, but they are also not in speaking terms, so why exactly would Newt think she's heading to Paris? This is obviously an editing mistake. Queenie tells Jacob she's going to Tina, but Newt is assuming this is still very weird before Jacob gets to tell him. So now we're in Paris again and we see Tina entering the secret wizard street thing. Kinda like Diagon Alley, I guess. Why didn't they just design the entrance to this place in an abandoned building like with Diagon Alley and St. Mungo's, instead of at the bottom of some stairs by a crowded street where you can be easily spotted? Guess we'll never know. Anyway, she's come to this circus place because of Credence and he is a helper there. I will talk about Nagini in a bit more detail when we move on through the film some more, but her inclusion in this just feels like a wink-wink at the audience. Yes, we remember Voldemort's snake. What we don't want, however, is the snake Neville beheaded as the conclusion to his character arc being an Asian woman. While she does carry this blood curse that means she will turn into a snake and not be able to turn back eventually, it doesn't really change the fact that she was once a human, let alone one of the good guys in these movies. Can't she just be a snake Voldemort used because snakes are the symbol of Slytherin? This is like Han's gun having a backstory in the Han Solo Star Wars film. It's unneeded and just makes the film worse. Just make her a new character instead. This is meant to be a new story in the universe with new characters. Shouldn't you be expanding the universe instead of narrowing it down to the exact same people in each story? So Credence tells her he thinks he's found where his mother is before this guy, Skender, breaks up their conversation and tells him to get to work. Why would someone who literally owns a house elf even need a person who isn't enslaved to them magically and has the power to disobey you? Sure, it's a circus with multiple things going on, you can't just use one house elf, but how much is Skender making from this? house? Can't he buy more house elves instead of using people? Now we move on to the scene with Nagini performing for the crowd, and one of the most common criticisms found of the scene is that this wouldn't be good entertainment because animagi exists, and that is absolutely correct. Despite Nagini not being an animagus, she still does the exact same things they do. What's entertaining about watching someone turn into an animal when that's already something people can do with enough training? Her eventually being stuck that way doesn't change the entertainment at all. As far as this audience is aware, she's just an animagus. How can a maledictus even be a form of entertainment? You're either watching something anyone can do with enough training, or just watching a snake. Top tier entertainment. Credence unleashes these fire pixie things and they escape from the circus just as Tina spots him. We have a pretty neat one take as she runs around the carnage the circus has been swallowed in, and Skender orders his house elf to pack away everything because they are leaving Paris. Tina tries to get something out of him before he leaves, and at first he doesn't say anything, but then she steps forward and he answers. First of all, what even made him answer her if he didn't want to begin with? Secondly, why did he even refuse? He gave the most vague answer that gave her pretty much no information. He's looking for his parents. How vague can you get? And why does he even know? Did Credence confide with Skender? You'd think the character described as a cruel man who only sees what he uses in a circus as a way to make money wouldn't care about any of them. Skender leaves after giving her that answer, and she turns to see Yusuf Karma behind her, who we also saw briefly in the circus scene. What you have to understand about the way that the script is written is that I can't really talk about these characters that in depth until we come to the finale, when there is the huge exposition dump and the subplots converge. So, like with Lita, I will not be talking about the issues with Yusuf until his presence is actually important. They both go to a cafe, and Yusuf explains that he was going after Credence because he believes they are related and that he wants to prove who Credence really is. Yusuf asks her if he showed her more concrete proof of who he is, will Credence be left alive, and she says he might, so he tells her to follow him. Tina decides to do this despite being a trained aura and should be much more cautious about these things, but we need the plot to progress. The biggest problem with the film is that there is far too much going on, and the script can't handle all these different subplots. It is universally agreed that J.K. Rowling is a much better book writer than screenwriter, and it really shows in this first third of the film, where all of this is being set up. So far, we have the Grindelwald big bad guy plot, Newt's beasts, Newt being banned from travelling internationally, Jacob and Tina's relationship problems, Dumbledore and Newt, Dumbledore and the Ministry, Dumbledore and Grindelwald, Lita Lestrange, Credence being alive, Credence finding his parents, Grindelwald and Credence, and now we have Yusuf Karma. If this story were to be told as a book, it would work much better. Rowling would not be confined to a 2-hour runtime instead of a maximum of like 8,000 pages or something. What the plot needs to function better is more fleshing out with the characters, more fleshing out with the ideas, and more fleshing out with the plot. The film just feels like there's too much going on. If this were a book, it would be much better, but either the studio, David Yates, or even Rowling insists that she write the screenplay. I genuinely believe that had this been a book around the same length of Half-Blood Prince or Goblet of Fire, this could be a good story. The major plot holes would be fixed, contrivances would be lessened, and while I do believe that Nagini's inclusion and some of the more member-berry things in the script wouldn't be better in book edition, I think they would be less of an issue. I'd take fanbait if the film was good, but fanbait in a film that is failing on almost every level is near insufferable. Back in Paris, Grindelwald uses his vision vape thing to make a picture of Credence appear. If I could, I'd describe it better, but I don't even know what this is. He says that Credence must and will come to him, and he is very certain of it. One of his henchmen, Kral, asks him what is so important about Credence, and this is weird. How does he not know why Grindelwald wants Credence? He's surely in his inner circle to be here. Does he just not confide with these people? Grindelwald approaches Kral and asks him whether he's loyal, and Kral does not answer. I don't know why Grindelwald keeps him around after this. You know he isn't loyal. Why are you risking betrayal? But can I just take a second to praise Johnny Depp's performance here? People really didn't like his casting after the first film, but his performance is really good. I don't see Johnny Depp, I see Grindelwald, and it is a shame he was fired. We've gotten through 40 minutes of the film now, about a third of its runtime. So far we have just been setting up every subplot, but we are soon coming to the turning point in the the film, where it all comes into motion and the plot really starts to begin. Despite this not being the worst chunk of the movie, it is the hardest to get through. We have just been through nearly an hour of setting up the story. Pretty much every scene so far has a large amount of exposition in it, and to a general audience it can be hard to get through. So far we have the ending of the first film being undone to include other subplots, we have entire factions being reduced to pure incompetence, and the world building is contradicting itself every scene. This is not a good start. It has been quite a ride, hasn't it? We've covered quite a lot in this video, and there's much more to come and much more to critique. I started this video back in 2019 after just seeing the film. Around the middle of that year I lost my motivation to do so for a while, and it wasn't until nearly a year later that I picked up the urge to continue. I redrafted the script multiple times, and by September I had reached my final draft. October to December was doing voice work before I semi-redrafted again to extend the script, so I would be covering much more and talking about a lot more. I've been focusing on this video for about a full year now. I apologize for the long stretch of time between the film's release and this video. I said back in the introduction that I had been focusing on getting the video done for about a solid month now, and while I could try and ask people to edit for me, I prefer to do it myself. I have a clear vision of what I want the video to be, and I don't think any editor could capture that. There might be a bit of a wait between this part and the second, because I will be taking a short break after this. It has taken a lot out of me to balance making this video and schoolwork. That being said, I might be guesting on Ecom again, so if you'd like to see what I'm up to, go check those out. Once I get part 2 out, I will hopefully be able to immediately start working on part 3, because I'm hoping I'll have enough passion and motivation to do so. This is my first critique series and my first long analysis of anything, so I'm quite new to this. I'm hoping the quality will improve as each part goes on. Know how I said this video will be the best piece of work I can do on YouTube or what I can use at the moment? Well, this should be the worst of the 3 videos, with part 3 being the best. We'll see how it turns out, it's hard to predict these things. As for what I will do after this series ends, I have a review I have some motivation to do, and 3 other videos that should be part of their own series of reviews. Other than that, I don't really have anything planned. It all depends on how I feel once I've got these videos done. I can't plot when each video will be completed and uploaded, but I have deadlines in June and September. Not that I think it will take that long. I should hopefully get them out by summer if I keep working at the rate that I am. Don't worry, I will touch some grass while I work on these, no need to comment anything. Anyway, I said in the introduction that I'm only doing this as a hobby, so please bear this in mind between each part. To save from any possible comments asking me about what music I used at some random timestamp, I've made a playlist which has all the music I used in this video in order of when they were played. I will likely do this for parts 2 and 3, it will be linked in the description. So this concludes part 1, thank you for joining me for so long, and I hope you will stay around for part 2 and 3. I will inevitably talk about more games, books, films, and of course, Harry Potter. Goodbye for now. I cannot undermine how important it is to have your villain be treated as a natural threat for your villain... What? Credence unleashes these fire pixie things and they escape from the circus just as Teeny...
This is a great movie, but muggles and squibs weren't ready for it.